What is it about Washington state that creates so many supernatural encounters? A majority of long-term Washington residents hold at least one story of the supernatural, me included. Many residents have at least half a dozen or more. Maybe it has to do with the land itself. One of the state's most famous residents, Chief Seattle, may have shed some insight of this phenomenon in a famous quote of his. "Every part of the earth is sacred to my people. Every shining pine needle, every sandy shore, every mist in the dark woods, every clear and humming insect is holy in the memory and experience of my people." Washington is filled with local places that have been sacred to indigenous peoples for thousands of years. Each town or park holds its own unique stories filled to the brim with supernatural and unexplainable occurrences. Tonight, we're going to look at a few of these places and their histories collected by a local Washington author, Jacob Zappi. He has compiled some of the local lore and history of the two regions, the Kitsap and Olympic Peninsulas, into an anthology called Northwest Mythologies. If you want to learn more, a link to purchase a copy will be in the description below, as well as a link in the pinned comments. Be sure to grab a book because it is amazing. Now, these tales are passed down from one generation to the next. Some of the facts can be verified. However, as is often the case, the history books lose some of the local lore and flavor that accompanies them. Whispered layers of added intrigue that, unless you live in an area, might be missed. Although these are not first-hand encounters, the histories behind these spots can go a long way to explain why paranormal experiences be so prevalent in a location. It is said that events can leave a lasting impression, or can even tear an unseen right between our material realm, that of the other realms. In Norse traditions, our physical realm was called Midgard. From our realm, all other realms were reachable through these rifts or portals. Certain spots, the requirements for people and beings to pass through is much less. These could include sacred groves of trees, waterfalls, swamps, bogs, peninsula, and mountaintops. Anywhere that two natural elements meet is said to be a potential passageway to yet another realm. Where the sky meets the earth, on a mountaintop or large rock where water meets the land. The more elements that are combined, the more likely that one of these portals or doors can supposedly be accessed. Gold Mountain is the tallest point in Kitsap County. Even though it is called a mountain, it is really only about 1,700 feet tall. What it lacks in height, though, it makes up for in strange things and mysteries. It was initially named Gold Mountain because early settlers discovered gold in the area. That is one of the peculiar things about the mountain. Abandoned mines are spread throughout it. Although gold is still supposedly in the mountain, all the mines were abandoned due to unexplained attacks on the miners. The only mine that is still easily accessible can be reached by taking the Gold Creek trailhead. One abnormal thing about this mine is that the vinegaroons, the size of an adult palm, can be found all over the cave's interior at certain times of the year. A vinegaroon is a terrible abomination of a creature that is part spider and part scorpion. Jacob had never run into them in Washington before finding them in this old mine. He had also never seen them in such numbers and massive sizes. When he encountered them, he immediately wondered about the size they could potentially reach deeper down away from predators. The mine does go pretty far back, but is flooded in about a foot of water, no matter the time of year. At the back of the shaft is a mound of soil blocking further exploration. Jacob often wonders how deep a motivated person would have to dig to connect to the other tunnels. Some of the other mines have been commandeered by the Navy for top-secret storage purposes. During Jacob's time as a Department of Defense policeman, he was responsible for checking on some of these mines converted to storage bunkers. He would turn off on a random unmarked dirt road and drive a few miles to a locked and barbed wire gate with a no trespassing Navy sign attached to it. Past this, the road would lead to metal doors set into the mountain. He would check the doors to make sure they were secured after opening them and ensuring everything was in order on the interior. Inside, the several inches thick metal doors were crates and boxes stacked back as far as a mag light flashlight could shine. They were not authorized to know what was in the boxes. There are at least half a dozen of these bunkers dug into the mountain. They're all supposedly connected through a series of tunnels. Jacob always thought that this was a weird place for the Navy to store things. At this time, Jacob lived close to the Gold Mountain Watershed area. The watershed is an area that encompasses the reservoir and the surrounding area. The reservoir supplies water to Bremerton. The weird part about this area is that approximately 50 square miles are off limits to the public. The water department has its own PD force that patrols the grounds mercilessly and will prosecute trespassers. He always thought this was odd as much of the site is public land. They justify this police force under the pretense of needing to keep the hard-to-reach reservoir in pristine conditions. Supposedly, if they were not so strict, they would need to put the water through additional filtration processes. Jacob has never before heard of a secret police force protecting a forested area, which further adds to the mystery of the whole area. What are they hiding? If this excuse was valid, it would be much cheaper for the city to add the extra filtration needed at the reservoir, rather than supply, train, and operate an entire police force to patrol, several thousand acres of land? The math just simply doesn't add up for the excuse of saving money on a filtration system. The police force is more likely there to protect the secrets of Gold Mountain from curious interlopers. Along the base of the mountain runs a rarely used train track. When in service, the Navy transports top-secret material to the local military installations. These tracks are in poor repair, and Jacob thought that they had all been long abandoned. Many of the ties have rotted through long ago and are not structurally sound. Nails are regularly missing, and the rails themselves are a deep orange from all the rust oxidation. While Jacob lived in the area, he would often use them for trail running and hiking. He thought they were mostly abandoned, and using them made it much easier to explore. However, he did know that some of the tracks were used once in a while, as many in the interior looked like they had not seen use in decades. One day, as Jacob was walking the tracks, he heard a loud clattering coming towards him. Then, the tracks began rumbling and shaking. Even though the tracks looked like they could not possibly be serviceable, he knew a train had to be approaching his location. Because he was in the middle of the woods, he quickly jumped into nearby bushes. Even though the signs had long ago rotted away, he suspected that walking on the tracks was not permitted. He thought if he were seen and reported, the strict Watershed police force would soon be closing in on his location to issue a trespassing citation. Jacob was surprised when an average pickup converted to drive on the railroad tracks had approached. He watched it through the bushes and saw that it was a government truck driven by two men. After they had passed, he emerged from the bushes and continued walking the tracks. Now, a few moments later, he heard an even louder rumbling and knew it could only be a train coming down the tracks this time. Once again, he ducks into the bushes in fear of getting in trouble for trespassing. A train engine passed by, pulling several cars with strange machinery strapped to about 10 flatbed cars. Jacob had never seen machinery like this before. Giant machine parts for a use he could not guess. Many of the pieces were round and were 10 to 20 feet high. They had several wires and electronic components attached to them. Also on the train were several armed military personnel wearing camouflage fatigues and carrying various assault guns. He could only guess that they were transporting top-secret machinery to one of the bunkers or local military bases. Whatever the military used the machines for, they would need tremendous energy to power them. It was weird to come across a convoy like this on tracks going through the middle of the forest, especially since it looked like they had abandoned the tracks several decades ago. After the train had passed, he just continued on his hike with no more strange interactions that day. A few weeks later, Jacob had another strange interaction with a train in the area. This incident occurred when he was jogging on the tracks across the highway from Gold Mountain Golf Course. He had jogged about 5 miles into the woods and had not seen another person that whole time. Then, out of nowhere, out came 10 boxcars on the tracks. No engine or workers were present. The train cars resembled cattle cars. They had holes to allow oxygen inside for the creatures held within to breathe. No one was around. There were also no roads across to access the area. He began to investigate the boxcars, and they looked like they had been there for several months, vacant. Jacob wanted to open them and see what was inside. He went to the door and found them secured with tamper tags. The military uses these metal tags to ensure cargo is not tampered with when it reaches the base. The only way to remove them is to break them off. If he was to remove the tags, eventually somebody would know that a person had looked inside. He thought about opening them anyway, but the danger and top secret signs all over the boxcars made him believe that that was not the best idea. Jacob thought he could hear something moving around inside a few of the cars. It sounded like clawed feet scratching the ground. When he moved around, he listened to the scratching noise coming from the interior following him. When he stopped and tried to peer in the cracks, the scratching suddenly stopped. Inside, peeking through the slits, he could only see darkness. He was startled when the scratching and movement was right in front where he was looking through one of the cracks. The creature in the car made a loud shriek and began violently rocking the whole car. He stumbles back in shock, swiftly continued on his jog at a heightened pace. As he increased the distance, he looked back over his shoulder to ensure that whatever he had heard inside the moving car had not jumped out. The boxcar was still shaking back and forth with a loud, shrill shrieking coming from inside. The cars quickly shrink from view. He had never run that far or fast in his life, and he knew he had to try and get away from that area. After that experience, he never ran on that part of the tracks again. In fact, it took Jacob several tries before he reached the dam at the reservoir. To achieve it, you must hike about 10 miles through unmarked log roads and the previously mentioned train tracks. The tracks and roads are very confusing. Many of them lead to dead ends after several miles. It can be frustrating after this happens a few times. A lot of backtracking is required if the right path is not known. In addition, they act as a makeshift labyrinth to keep unwanted people from reaching the restricted area. An added concern if the Watershed police catch you. At the very least, you will get a trespassing notice. At the most, they will turn you over to the sheriff for criminal charges. Finally, after several attempts and one trespassing verbal notice, he had reached the far end of the reservoir. The water was blue and beautiful. It was an aquamarine hue and crystal clear. The hard-to-reach reservoir was certainly in pristine condition. Jacob hiked the length of the reservoir, which is about 3 miles. And suddenly, he came to the Casad Dam. This thing is enormous and in the middle of nowhere. It is almost 200 feet high and is literally just in the center of the woods. Jacob was walking in a dense forest when unexpectedly, a massive dam appeared out of the foliage. No security was around, and he could have quickly walked out into the middle of the dam. The only thing that stopped him was the signs saying the area was under video surveillance, and the knowledge that a whole police force protected the entire area. Although, the dam does not generate electricity. Officially, having been up there, he saw structures that appeared to be large turbines, and it has a massive spillway. That dam would generate vast amounts of electricity. A whole police force protects it that could potentially keep whatever it is making electricity for a secret. The final strange thing about Gold Mountain is the peculiar buildings and secret tunnels scattered all throughout the mountain Jacob had found. To reach the top of Gold Mountain, you must follow several unmarked and partially abandoned-looking log roads. It took him several tries before he had reached a survey coin that marks the highest point in the county. As he had wandered countless random log roads trying to get to the top, many of them ended in strange buildings. Some of these were towers for cell phone service or TV networks. However, many more were strange military-style buildings with no markings. They were constructed with cinder blocks and thick iron doors. They have no frills or outside markings that indicate what they might be used for. As you get closer to the top, giant utility hole covers leading down into the mountain begin to show up. Big metal doors that go into the mountain are spread all throughout. These strange buildings and doors start to appear roughly 15 miles through the forest. Just past the survey coin is the most peculiar structure. It is a complex of 2 buildings. One is attached to a massive tower approximately 200 feet high. The building and enormous metal towers are unlocked and could be climbed and examined by an explorer braver than Jacob, someone who does not mind heights. This tower is different from the radio and cell phone towers that are more common. No signs are attached to it, and its function he could not guess. The second building is the same cinder block, no frill building style that marks a government or military-like facility. This building appeared to be unlocked as the door was ajar. He dared not go inside as there were signs everywhere warning of cancer-causing waves inside the building. Both buildings were overgrown and looked to not be used regularly. Jacob thinks that most of the mountain is filled with tunnels that connect. He believes that a Cold War-era base, or maybe even older, is inside the mountain. The dam, no one can visit, protected by a whole police force, supplies the off-grid power to this suspected base. He suspects it is still in limited use, and some experiments or other secret activities still take place deep in the mountain. He also thinks that much of it has been partially abandoned as the Cold War thawed out. He does not believe that it is a nefarious as Stranger Things plot. However, the government devised a plan to build and stockpile supplies in case of nuclear or other attacks on local bases. He would love to know the extent of the tunnels and buildings, but who knows if that information will ever become available to the public. On many Native American reservations, buildings that used to be used for Shaker churches can be seen standing in various stages of disrepair. Many people, including local tribe members, don't know the history behind these churches. In the late 1800s, Native culture was under attack, and their spiritual beliefs were outlawed to be practiced under penalty of fines or even imprisonment. As a result, Natives began practicing a new religion that they called the Shaker religion. This combined aspects of their previous spiritual beliefs and the beliefs of Christianity. They would dance around in a shaking manner while singing to go into a trance-like state. In this state, they were said to commune with dead relatives, angels, and even God himself. Many of these churches are still around on many reservations, but have fallen into various forms of abandonment as attendance has dropped off or shut down completely. Many of the churches were built on previously ancient holy sites. It was a common tactic to get Native people to convert religions. As a result, many people living on the reservations usually avoided the churches if at all possible. Many people living around the area swore to see shadow beings and hear drumming and chanting coming from the churches in the middle of nowhere. However, most churches are long since abandoned or not occupied in the middle of the night when the drumming is heard. Jacob had a childhood friend who happened to live next to one of these churches on the Lower Elwha Reservation. The church had not been used since around the 1950s. They were friends in the late 1990s. For 40 years, the church had been left to get run into a dilapidated condition. During sleepovers, his friend would tell him stories about hearing drumming and chanting coming from within the building. He would also tell Jacob a story that the church believed in spirit dogs that would appear and carry souls away to hell to protect the church from unwelcome guests. He, of course, did not believe in any of these stories and just thought his friend was trying to frighten him. Well, one night, Jacob was staying over at his friend's house when some local girls invited them to come to their house down the road. They were both excited to go until his friend realized that they could not get a ride and would have to walk the trail that ran right by the old Shaker church. The friend refused to go and insisted they had to cancel meeting up with the girls. Jacob told him he was crazy and he would walk by himself to go meet the girls and they would come back to get his friend after meeting up. Jacob simply zipped up his coat, put on his shoes, borrowed a flashlight for the walk. The reservation at this time had no streetlights. It was pitch black outside. Being that it was about midnight, undeterred, he turned on the flashlight and began walking. As he got closer to the church, he could swear he heard faint drumming coming from the inside of the building. As he got closer, he thought faint chanting was drifting on the night breeze. The noises got louder as he drew near, but it never got loud enough to honestly tell where it was coming from. He thought maybe somebody inside the church was practicing their religion. However, no lights were on and no cars were parked in the parking lot. It was a creepy experience, but nothing to stop a young man from meeting up with girls. Jacob reached the girls' house and they hung out for about an hour or so. He told them about the noises coming from the church and encouraged them to walk with him to his friend's house to meet back up. They thought the drumming and chanting was strange, but after all, they were on a native reservation. They thought it could have been coming from someone's house and just carried funny on the wind. The two girls and him began walking back towards the friend's house. Again, the drumming and chanting started back up. As it got louder, it was too much for the girls. They got freaked out and wanted to head back to their own house. It was now approaching 2 in the morning. Jacob had to get to his friend's house because that was where he was staying the night. So Jacob said goodnight to the girls and continued to walk on. As he drew parallel to the church, the drumming and chanting stopped. He was relieved as he had to cut through the parking lot to get to the trail to the woods that led to the friend's house. As he approached the woods, he began shining his flashlight ahead to find the trailhead. The light shone back 6 sets of glowing eyes hidden in the trees. He immediately became terrified as it was the middle of the night. Thoughts of a pack of coyotes or something worse was lurking in the woods filled his mind. He turned around and quickly began walking back towards the girl house that he had left. Immediately, he heard the unknown animals break from the bushes and run right towards him. The sound of gravel being kicked up as they rushed out of the tree line on a murderous rampage sounded like an avalanche in his heightened fear state. At this point, Jacob was in full panic mode and began running as fast as he could. And he could hear these things getting closer each second, and he knew he was not going to be able to outrun them. Their frenzied breathing sounded like a pack of devils broken out of the deepest pits of hell itself. And at some point in his mad flight, he trips over an unseen obstacle, or possibly his own feet. Jacob has always been kind of clumsy, and it always seemed to strike at the worst moments. He scrambled for his dropped flashlight, quickly shined it on the approaching doom, and Jacob's heart sank into his chest as he saw what was chasing him. They appeared to be these giant black dogs with glowing white eyes. They were hard to focus on. They looked like a blurry video of a murderous big dog running towards him. It felt like he was watching a video. It was as if they were not fully in reality, like a projection, but deadly real. They looked to be about the size of a Great Dane or a large Mastiff. In his panicked mind, it was hard to comprehend what he was seeing. Jacob saw at least 4 of the beasts that were about to close in on him and be prepared to try and put up a best fight before being mauled. At the same time, he was crawling backward as fast as he possibly could while keeping the light shining on the dogs. The gravel from the parking lot was digging into his hands. As they closed the last 20 feet, he did his best to shine his light on them, and they became more and more spectral. At first, they appeared to be mixing with a thick fog. Then, as they closed the last few feet, he began to lose them in the dense fog. By the time they had reached Jacob, nothing but thick gray fog was left rolling towards him. Fog had rolled in, covering the whole area where these vicious dogs were closing for the kill only seconds before. Jacob thought he had somehow lost them in the thick gray abyss. He imagined they were circling behind him for the killing blow, but after several minutes, everything was quiet and still. The fog even seemed to look less ominous now. He was left sitting covered in a lather of his own sweat. Jacob was relieved, but also in shock because the dogs seemed quite corporeal when he shined the light on them for the first few times, or at least real enough to pose an imminent threat. He looked around and saw that he was now a fair distance away from the Shaker Church, just on the edge of where the gravel lot had met the road. He got up, dusted himself off, and then took a much longer way to his friend's house rather than the route leading through the church grounds. Jacob never walked by that church again at night, and he also considers himself very lucky that he escaped the spirit dogs. He thinks that he just got far enough away from the rift that the church makes between the spirit realm. A few steps, a few feet less, crawled in a panic, backward, frightening haste, and the dogs might have been tangible enough to drag him to his death, or drag his soul to suffer in an unknown hell. Jacob often still wonders if someone was really chanting inside the church or just the memory was imprinted on the area, like a long-forgotten television someone had left on by accident. He has not been to that reservation in over 20 years. One thing is for certain, he would never walk by that church again during the witching hour. Thanks for watching to the end. Why are there so many strange, scary, and beautiful things about the Pacific Northwest? This question ran through Jacob's head often once he left the area for a few years. When he lived in Washington, he never really thought about the sheer amount of local lore and strange things associated with so many local areas, as every neighbor or relative had at least a few stories. When he went to other states and even countries, he encountered some stories, but not nearly as many as he had heard and experienced while living in Washington. As far as he can figure, the local mix of Native Americans and the large population of Scandinavians in the region has made a unique environment for many stories to be made. Both cultures enjoy a good story and look to explain natural phenomena and the unexplained with stories and theories. Behind every craggy precipice is a lurking giant. In every fern-draped forest lies a fair folk home. In each dark forest stalks unknown creatures. Each long-forgotten bridge is a perfect home for trolls. But why don't more places have so many stories like these? Jacob often faces backlash from skeptics that claim that if there are so many prevalent occurrences in the state, why have they not experienced them themselves firsthand? After all, they have spent ample time in the wilderness also. He has also had several encounters with unexplained experiences starting at a young age. He read in ancient belief systems that once you have an encounter with the supernatural, your spirit starts to act like a beacon to these beings. Supposedly, these entities can see someone's spirit that has been touched by one of their own kind. It looks to them like a brightly burning flame. Much like moths drawn to fire, other beings are then drawn to the individual. He can confirm that this proved accurate for him. If you do not have an open mind to these types of experiences, often they will pass you by. Most people never really go off the beaten path, nor should they. But even when they are having an encounter on familiar grounds, they dismiss it away as a common occurrence, instead of investigating or even keeping an open mind to the possibility that something more is in fact just outside our normal sensory range. Once again, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to go ahead and leave a comment down below and let me know your thoughts. And if you're new to the channel, be sure to go ahead and smack that subscribe button as I release new content on the storytelling of the mysterious and supernatural. As always, guys, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll check you guys out in the next video.